Hello, everyone. I just wanted to make a quick video to do two things. First of all, some of you have been asking me where exactly you find the videos for the exam. And I just wanted to let you know that I had already sent those out. They are under the announcements, I believe, and they're called Medieval Rhetoric and they're called Renaissance Rhetoric. And I believe that those have enough to get you through the exam. If they don't, then the following will, okay? And I'll make this as quick as I possibly can. After the fall of Rome, we really have a group of people who think that rhetoric is evil. It does bad things. It was used first by the serpent, who was Satan. And it's not Lucifer. Lucifer was an angel. Satan was the serpent. Okay. Um, and the devil and whatever else you want to call them. Okay. In whatever place you want to call them. Remember, we're living in the Holy Roman Empire. So we're living underneath the thumb of the Catholic Church during the medieval period. So they felt that if the devil was the first one to use rhetoric to tempt Eve with the apple, and Eve was the first one to use it to tempt Adam with the apple, then clearly it's bad. It was also practiced by pagans. You know, the Greeks and the Romans were pagans because, well, it was before the birth of Christ. So they were not believers of God, which means that they weren't Jewish or anything. They believed in the spirit of the rocks and the god of thunder and the god of the sea and so on. So obviously rhetoric is terrible if it's used by the pagans. Also, apparently rhetoric would arouse the passions. Now there's a lot of debate about what that actually means. The more, let's say, stoic or the more chaste scholars might say that what that actually means is that it would get people riled up about things such as their feelings, which is not what they should be making decisions on. They should be making decisions based on the logic and the reasoning that they use. So this is a place where perhaps pathos comes in just a little bit too much. Some people like flat out say rhetoric is lying because you can take numbers, you can take anything you want and turn it into something else. And of course, Plato had the same complaint. And then the other, not so chaste, perhaps a little bit more risque interpretation of that would be that, well, if you've ever been a debater and you had fallen for something called good debater syndrome, when people are really good at debate, it doesn't matter what they look like physically. You might find them attractive because of that talent that they have. Same thing can go for dancers, for basketball players, football players. I mean, my goodness, Ben Roethlisberger, really? No one finds him attractive. I mean, physically, right? But when he is out on the field, I'm glad to have him on my team. We're 8-0, and I'm proud of myself that it took me this long in the season and the semester to mention the record of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Sometimes we have professors or teachers that we had in high school that we really aren't that attractive, or they're much older than we are, but when they're in front of the room and they're talking, there's something about them. And all of this is linked to power. When you're preaching in the church, much like when and remember, again, we're in medieval period, and much like when you're standing up and speaking in public, people find that to be powerful, and powerful is attractive in some cases. So depending on which interpretation you want to use, rhetoric was evil. That's what we know. And Augustine said, hold on, guys. If the devil is using rhetoric and we don't, guess who's going to win that one? Well, without saying that the devil would win, he said we need to practice rhetoric, but in a way that praises God. So he had a few ideas. First of all, let's face it, St. Augustine was a pagan and he really liked practicing rhetoric because it made him a lot of money. So he's going to find a way for it to be used if he's going to move over to the church. Some people say he became a member of the church because, what else do you do at that point? Some say he was converted truly, and others say that his mother, who is Monica, and later on Saint Monica, if you're into the Catholic Church thing, she prayed every day that he would convert from his paganism from his father to her Christianity. So depending on how you look at it, he got these bright ideas that, hey, we could still use rhetoric in the church. We just have to use it appropriately. So he says there's 3 reasons why you might use rhetoric in the church: to teach, to preach, and to convert or persuade. Okay. So what we really have is you're either teaching people about the Bible, like at the most basic level, here's the information that you need to know, or you are speaking to a crowd that already believes in Jesus and already believes in the Christian religion, but you're making them feel better about it. And then there, of course, is the third kind, which is to actually persuade people to come over or to believe in Christianity and practice Christianity. So in your book, it outlines that there are 3 levels of style from Quintilian that match these 3 different goals for rhetoric in the church. So I'll let you go ahead and find that. But each level of style has a different purpose for Augustine. The other thing that he tells us is that it's important that we pray before we speak, because remember that Quintilian and Cicero and others said you must know everything about a topic in order to speak on it, in order to practice rhetoric ethically. And so if you're going to know everything during the medieval time, who do you turn to? God. Okay, so as long as God told you to say it, you're good. Okay, and women were still not speaking in the church at this point in time, just so we're all clear. Finally, Augustine wraps up by saying, if you read this whole treatise and you didn't like it, that's because you're dumb. Essentially, that's what he's saying. It's called an epilogue. It's a piece that we put at the end of a work in order to sort of underscore or to give sort of a 2020 view of what you just read. In his case, he says, if you didn't like it or you didn't understand it, go back and reread it. And if you still don't like it or understand it, you're just not smart enough to understand it, get out. And it's kind of an interesting way to end a treatise on Christian doctrine, but okay. After that, people say, oh, well, if it wasn't for St. Augustine, we wouldn't have any practice of rhetoric at all. And that interpretation may absolutely be true. During this time, during the Crusades, they were destroying the pagan texts. There were some Islamic monks, I believe is the correct term, who preserved those for us. They went into the caves before the Christians destroyed them. Why would the Christians destroy these important historical texts? Well, because they were written by people who were pagan. So of course they're evil texts. But thank goodness somebody was out there deciding to save some, but this is why we don't have complete works from some of the students of our great orators and great rhetoricians and philosophers from prior to a certain period, because they just couldn't preserve them. They didn't get to them fast enough. They've been destroyed, and we don't know what's been destroyed and what's not been destroyed. Here's how I remember this. I went to see the Dead Sea Scrolls at the Ben Franklin exhibit in Philadelphia at the museum, and I always pictured scrolls, these gigantic things that you like open up and they're huge, right? And they must be like these amazing pieces, right? I was so excited, and I'm like, Mom, let's go, because we happen to be in Philadelphia for a conference I was having. So we get in there, and the scroll pieces are like this big, and you have to like squint and look in there, and they're obviously not in a language I understand. Fascinating. But if you were thinking of one thing and you get another, that expectation is gonna be harmed a little bit on the Dead Sea Scrolls. Unlike when I was living in Minnesota, and St. John's Monastery was doing a 20-year project. They should wrap up this year, if I recall correctly. I believe it was a 20-year project to calligraphy the Bible in pretty huge sizes. I mean, I want to say that they were I mean, they were huge pieces of paper that were thick, gold trim, and we're talking about with all the inlay of the calligraphy, the color, the bright color, the way that the monks would have handwritten the Bible back during the medieval ages, and they've replicated this. And of course, it takes years to work on a project like that. And the artwork is stunning. Anyway, I got to go see it in about 2005, I believe it was, or 2006 in the museum up in Minneapolis. And it was, I was blown away at how huge and beautiful it was. And of course, I don't know if that was because I was raised Catholic Christian, or if that was because I was just awed by the artwork. I can tell you my friend Scott, who was with me, had absolutely no reaction to it emotionally. And he was raised in a church. I don't know which one, but he certainly is definitely declared atheist at this point. So I guess it just wasn't that moving for him. So I don't really know why it was moving, but according to Saint Augustine, you should be moved by what God wants to tell you. Okay, and that's a big assumption to make about your audience, by the way. I mean, well, nowadays especially, but even back then, it was quite an assumption. So here we are, and we're getting towards the end of these like I said, depending on which historian you talk to, 800 to 1600 years, who the heck knows? Depending on the historian you talk to, we're getting towards that end. And I mentioned Christine de Pizan, who, of course, wrote The City of Ladies, The Treasury of the City of Ladies, about how to act as an advisor to a king or a prince or whatnot. In fact, she addresses the work, quote, to the princesses. So really, if that's the case, how is this important to us? Why would an etiquette book for the princesses be important? Well, if you read it, what she's really doing is describing how to influence those around you. Okay, none of us who are not princesses, but ladies of the court or courtiers, we are trying to influence the court. So which by the way we mean the royal court. So in order to do that, how do you behave? What do you do? And she talks about supporting and sort of buttering up the prince or the lord that you're speaking to, and how to work your way into getting what you want from them. It's depending on how you read it, it could be really frivolous, or it could be super important that a woman wrote this. And of course, it's not the only thing she wrote. I do not study her poetry, but there are people who do. She is considered a great person in the history of French literature. Okay, so I'll leave the rest of that to you. I just wanted to talk about what's important to rhetoric and persuasion. Next up, we have Margaret Fell, or Margaret Fell Fox, who has a wonderful story. She inherited, well, no woman could inherit land back then, but her father, when he died, he had no sons, and he had a rather large estate called Swarthmore Hall. And on that estate, in that quite frankly mansion-like sized house, there was a huge hall in the front of the building, and you walked into it, and you walked into sort of the long hall when you got in there. And by hall, I mean a place to sit and do things, or stand and do things. So in there, her husband obviously kept the house, and he was given the house by rights because her father had died. And that was the only way that Margaret would be able to keep the house, was if she married someone. They stayed there. Her husband was a judge. He was a circuit judge, which means literally was traveling the circuit on a regular basis, which means he wasn't around a whole heck of a lot. At Swarthmore Hall, since it was her home, she used to host these meetings for people to talk about the church and to talk about the Bible. And obviously they were for women. And then she met a speaker named, I believe it's Thomas Fox. His last name is Fox. And Fox was a speaker and a reverend, but he had these radical ideas that were not quite within the realm of the Catholic Church. And of course, at this time, the rumblings of Protestantism have gotten into the world. We have 95 Theses from Luther. Martin Luther telling us, that we shouldn't follow the Catholic Church. I think it's 95. It's 95 or 99. Someone look that up. Maybe correct me. It's not on the exam, obviously. Okay. So we want to look at that. But also, and my phone is ringing as it's setting on my computer, which is really, really awkward because it's a former student who I'm going to have to call back in just a little bit. So let's get back to Margaret Fell. She would hold these meetings, and this Fox guy, he came in, and he was actually the one who talked her into holding these meetings. And Margaret didn't really take a lot of convincing, but what she did do was taking from Fox's learnings. She said that one of the things we should do is allow women to speak in the church. She started a thing called the Circle of Friends. She is often referred to as the mother of Quakerism. I'm not sure if that was her or Fox. She spent time in jail just like Fox did because she refused to swear on the Bible. And she was called in to testify against him for something, not sure what. There's a real soap opera here that we can listen to, or, just the facts, ma'am, is what I like to say sometimes. What's important coming from Margaret Fell is that she wrote this piece called Women Speaking Justified. It's got a much longer title, but that's the opening of it. And in there, she uses the Bible. She uses stories from the Bible, nothing else, as her evidence for why women should be allowed to speak in the church. Again, she's not making an argument for women to go out and speak on the town square or whatever she wants to do. She is going out there for the purpose of trying to get people to understand that if God had women in the Bible doing things for him, then why shouldn't somebody here on earth at this time be allowed to speak for him or about him in the church? So there you have Margaret Fell. I find her fascinating because she only uses the Bible, which today we might sort of do a double take at, although for me it's another book. I mean, it's a published book. It's well known just from that fact. It's got some narratives in it, if you want to look at it that way. In the end, however, she only used the Bible and relied solely on it to make an argument that women should be allowed to speak in the church. And in fact, it's a fascinating argument, and it shows a really good structure for how we might justify any claim, honestly, any argument. So it's really one of our introductions to argument and the use of evidence for that argument. The next thing that I just kind of wanted to point out, I believe I mentioned Luther already, who actually doesn't come along, I don't think, for a little while until after Fell, but I would have to double check. That's not on the test either. But he, of course, Protestantism is coming up and people questioning the Catholic Church, which, okay, seems like a good idea to me to question everything. Call me crazy. And then I'm a horrible Catholic, just in case you haven't picked that up yet. I question everything. And that's why I was trained more by Jesuits, who at this time were considered pretty violent. The Jesuits are an arm of the church that's considered academic and scholarly. And we, generally are the advisors to the Pope and to the bishops. They're the ones who, I say we as if like women can do it. They can't. But usually out of the Jesuits, and in fact, our Pope right now, if you're paying attention, is in fact a Jesuit. So what does that mean? Well, it means he questions things. It means he's not going to accept things blindly. And unless I'm completely dreaming this up, I believe he just made a comment on accepting people of the LGBTQ community because they're humans too. Oy, imagine that. How long is it going to take the Catholic Church to come up to par with a lot of these things? I don't know. And I don't know that any of us ever will get to a point where we can eradicate any type of bigotry, racism, any ism, honestly, feminism, or misogyny, or anything else. I don't know how we're going to get rid of all that. But I feel like maybe the Holy Roman Catholic Church during the medieval period, the Dark Ages, might have set us back a little bit. but we seem to have broken through it. Why? How? How did that happen? Well, during this time, also towards the end of the medieval period, but definitely during the beginning of the Renaissances, we really start to understand a new group of people who come up, thinkers, philosophers, who decide that we need to start thinking about the role of the human mind in reasoning and in philosophy and in questioning what is right and what is good. These people, of course, are called the humanists. It's not that they believe that God needed to go away and only humans know the truth. That's not it at all. Just to ease your mind, if that's what you've been taught, that is incorrect. Not all humanists believe that way. Some humanists were in fact atheists, but there's other people who are atheists who are not humanists. Essentially, a humanist says, it's possible for us to know things too. It's possible for us to know things that did not come to us from God. We can experience the world, know and understand, and share that knowledge. So the study of life is not limited to what God tells us to do, and so on. Last but not least, just wanted to speak a little bit on this. With the humanists comes an interest in science. And by science, I mean hard science. Now, reason and science are used sort of together here. They're used interchangeably. Is that correct? Well, you know what? When you're a grad student, we can debate that if you choose to do that, okay? But for right now, accept that reasoning and science are essentially the same thing. And so we start getting the scientists who come out, who start talking about how human beings come to know. In fact, they put a heavy focus on empiricism. And of course, as we know from our earlier study of Plato, empiricism is anything that human beings can know through the five senses. Probably one of the biggest proponents of this, of course, is Bacon. Sorry about that. I'm not winning today. Sir Francis Bacon says that it is important to study the repeated nature of things and to empirically experience them. He really had an inductive method. You go out, you do a few things, you find out what happens, and then you can make a claim, okay? But it was called the Baconian method. We actually still called it that for a very long period of time until somebody came along and said, well, this is actually deductive. What we're really doing is making a hypothesis, testing it, and if we make a hypothesis and we're wrong when we test it, then that means the hypothesis is never true. We can debate that later. But that scientific method is more deductive, and so they called it the scientific method instead of the Baconian method. And honestly, that's the difference between the two, not that you ever need to know that, okay? But Bacon gave us two works in our book that are really important. The first one, I believe, that you read was, it's not Orgam Novum Organum, it is the other one. Which is escaping me. But it's where he talks about, really faculty psychology. And faculty psychology, believe it or not, is not just for teachers. Faculty psychology is about saying, what do you have the faculty to do? What faculties, skills, talents, etc., were you given? And in your brain, each of these talents or skills or faculties that you have are divided up in there. And some people did not get a bigger part of the brain, a faculty of rhetoric, or a faculty of reason, or a faculty of math. I did not get the math one. Wasn't even in line. So if we believe this, which we do sort of still, and we did for a very long time, you believe that there's a part of the brain that dictates certain functions, not just physical functions, but psychological functions. So here we really get one of the first studies in psychology, one of the first studies that introduces us to the idea of the brain, what the role of the brain is in speaking, what the role of the brain is in invention, which, by the way, Bacon says invention cannot exist. Why? Not invention of words. Because if you speak something, you've already thought of it. And if you thought of it, it's because you got it from somewhere. which means you didn't invent it, which is fascinating. More likely you had an experience that made you think that and you reasoned from it, but it's not a new thing. Fascinating. Love that guy. All right. And that really is kind of a cool thing if you think about it. Like, oh, is that possible? Is it possible for us to invent something new? Which reminds me of the Bare Naked Ladies song, It's All Been Done, which, of course, is a funny song, but not related to this actually at all. So Bacon says, if you don't have the faculty to do something, you're not going to be able to do it. So if you don't have a faculty for rhetoric, you can't do it. Very different from what Quintilian and Cicero said, which is it helps if you have a talent for it, but you can be trained to do it either way if you work hard enough. I hope I worked hard enough. I don't know if I have that in my brain or not. What this did lead to is in the 1950s, particularly late 40s, 50s, and 60s, early 60s, is lobotomies. How? Well, because a lobotomy is when they cut out the front part of your brain, because they believe that's where hysteria exists. And so they would just cut it out, not realizing, of course, that you need your whole brain in order for your brain to function at all, really. And why the frontal lobe? What do we know about it? Well, let's face it, there has to be some truth to his claim, because I mean, people say this is not true, but it's kind of true. When I don't know if it's when you're lying necessarily, but it's definitely when you're trying to remember, you look up and to the right. But when you're trying to make something up, you usually look to the left. Okay. I didn't realize I did that until somebody told me this. But it doesn't mean if you're looking to the left, you're lying necessarily. If you talk to any jury analyst, they'll tell you that. But it definitely does mean that you're thinking of something that's not immediately available in the frontal lobe right here, where your short-term memory is. Okay. So that there's something to be said for this. But that's not to say it's the complete picture, because it's certainly not. The next piece that we get from Bacon is called Novum Organum, which translates literally to new instrument. And in Novum Organum, he gives us the 4 idols. Now, idols, IDOLS, are things that distract us from the truth. So for Bacon, there's 4. There's the idol of the den, the idol of the theater, the idol of the cave, no, den was cave, the idol of the marketplace, and I'm going to think of the 4th one in just 1 second. It's cave, theater, marketplace, the second one. It's the second one that I'm missing. I'll get there. The idol of the cave is, oh, I know, tribe. Took me a second. The idol of the cave is that sort of our own perspectival. That's not a word, but we make it up all the time. So that those things that we can see that no one else does. So like our personal experience, whether it's been shared or not, the way we view the world that's been concocted by all the things that have happened to us and the things that we've learned and things we've been told. And then the idol of the tribe is things that we can learn, and we're limited by being human. We can only take so much in. We can only see so much. We can only hear so much at one time. We have a short period of time to deal with things. We're physically limited by certain things. So that's the idol of the tribe. We are all human. And therefore, as I said to one of you today, I think that we all err. We all make mistakes because we are human, because we're limited by that capacity. The third idol is the idol of the marketplace, the idol of the marketplace. And if you think about it this way, what is the exchange that we use in the world? What's the currency? And the answer is language. When you're trying to persuade, when you're trying to talk to someone, language is your currency. That means that language, if it's inherently flawed, means our currency is inherently flawed, which means that we're limited by that. Well, John Locke definitely outlines that later, but some of the things that are wrong with language is just that words are arbitrarily assigned. They're not naturally linked to their object. A pumpkin isn't a pumpkin because it's inherently a pumpkin. I didn't pop out and go, "Hi, I'm Elizabeth." I mean, these things don't happen. Human beings name them, which means that there's an arbitrary relationship between a word and the thing to which it refers, which we'll get into deeper after this exam in the third part of the class. And so the idol of the marketplace. Now, the last one, the idol of the theater, is culture. And all of us have had different experiences and we've lived during different time periods. I say every time that an elderly person dies, an entire book dies, which, is an old saying about how much information, how much experience, and how much of a narrative those people have to tell that they didn't tell before they died or that we didn't get a chance to talk about. And I think about how many questions I have from my grandparents who have passed on, or my dad who died 15 years ago. So many things I'd love to ask them about because I didn't ask them when they were alive because I didn't know to. There's also the things that we're taught by our culture. I'm from southwestern Pennsylvania. I've got a lot of quirks and cliques. That's just a fact. I say yins. I call people jagoffs all the time, which, by the way, gets me in trouble. But where I come from, that's normal. It's just a way of saying jerk. My county, Beaver County, Pennsylvania, was on the freaking television for like 2 days straight during the election. Allegheny County, which is where I went to school, that is the city of Pittsburgh, that was a huge problem for this election. And Erie County, which is a place that I competed a lot, became a player in the election this year. And so it was weird watching all that. But what's even weirder is that I know a lot more about what they were trying to communicate. And so there were times when I'd be watching a story on the news and they would say, "Oh, well, this county is more Democrat and it's always been that way." And I'd be like, "No, that's so wrong." They were talking about how Beaver County was a stalwart for the Republican Conservative Party. That's just wrong. For 50 years, until 2008, that place was deep, deep blue. Believe me. If you weren't, down here, if you have Republican on your sign, you're probably going to get elected. Up there, you won't. Up there, if you don't have a D on your sign, you're not going to get elected. So it was back then, and it was inverted. You might think, oh, 2008, that was a long time ago. No, 2008 was the first time that Barack Obama was elected president. So what's that say? And so they voted Democrat a lot, and then the presidency flipped over. Next thing we know, the whole county is red. But it certainly has not been that way as a stalwart, right? It's just not. Why do I know that? Why does anybody care? Well, it's interesting in the analysis that they're getting that just wrong, right? And some people know that, but not a lot of people apparently. And the second thing is that the only reason I have that information is because of where I was raised. And Cuyahoga County in Ohio, because I went to school there, and Hamilton County, because I went there to school there too in Ohio. So I know about the places I've been, the experiences I've had, the cultures I've experienced, and that's it. So we're limited by our cultural experiences, even common sense, old wives' tales, things like that. In fact, it's true. Chicken soup does make you feel better when you have a cold. It doesn't cure you because nothing cures a cold, but it does make you feel better. Why? Because your mom said so? No, because of the salt content and the fact that it's bland and the noodles make your stomach settle. Okay, so there's an actual reason for that, but we call it an old wives' tale, but it works, right? And there's a reason that it works scientifically as well as culturally. So we're limited by our culture. We're limited by the idol of the marketplace, the language that we have to use. We have a limited amount of language, a limited options in language. The idol of the tribe, the fact that we're human, limits us in our ability to know, to see, to observe, to hear, to touch, and taste. Now, those five senses are limited because human beings all are limited in some way in those things, in various different ways perhaps, but definitely limited. And then, of course, the idol of the cave, our own perspective. We never want to get out of it. We want to live right here where we know what's right. And that sometimes limits our ability to create or to see outside of the box and to know what's outside there because we don't want to look for it. Okay. Sometimes I don't want to know what my nephew's doing at college because I know the stories I told him and I shouldn't have told him those stories. Right. So those four idols actually restrict or limit us from knowing the whole truth or being able to empirically understand the whole truth. Okay. So along comes another dude. His name, well, I'm going to go with John Locke right now. And I'm not necessarily doing these in the order in which you read them in your book. I'm just doing them in the order that makes sense to me. John Locke comes along. You might have heard of the guy. If you watched the show Lost, you heard of him, I hear. I didn't watch it. But also, if you know anything about social contract or if you know anything about law and social theory, then you have heard of John Locke. John Locke also, however, wrote a piece where he talks about the trouble with language. Okay. And he says there's four main things. There's four main things wrong with language. The first is that, one word cannot represent a complex idea. You can't encompass a very complex idea with one word. Another one is that there can be one word that means multiple things. And the third problem is that there could be 15 words or more for the same concept or idea. And then finally, the most important, there's no natural relationship between an object and the word that we use for it. And so with all these problems with language, how do we solve it? And he says, first we have to understand that there's two things going on. There is the language and understanding that I have, and then what you get when I speak. Those are two different meanings already, just right off the bat. And so his suggestion was that we purify language. Take it down to the bare minimum. Get as few words as possible. Make sure that they all mean the same thing to everybody. It's called a dictionary. So when people talk about denotative meaning of a word and you're like, oh, that's the dictionary meaning. No. It's the generally agreed upon definition, which Webster's has deemed to put into the dictionary. So the dictionary is just what we all agree the meanings are. Okay. And so that is how John Locke explains that problem with language that Bacon was trying to get at with the marketplace, the idol of the marketplace, the distraction of language. And speaking of that, we're all going to talk about that after the exam. But the next thing, and I think this is the last thing that I really want to talk about in this video. I think it'll be good enough. If you have questions, let me know. I did include on your list of things to study George Campbell. That one won't be difficult for you. And then also this guy, Vico. G. Battista Vico is considered a minor philosopher at best, but I have a copy of his book on the study of methods of our time. It's sitting right, actually I can see it right from where I'm sitting right now. This piece is very important because he talks about a debate. He says that we can't both be right. Either our modern instruments, and modern for his time, modern instruments and modern way of asking questions, such as the Baconian method, is going to get us closer to the truth, or the way of the ancients, the philosophical way of questioning the dialectic. Let's try to get this right. The dialectic exchange that ultimately helps us get to the truth. So who did it better? The ancients or the moderns? I'll actually leave that to you to find out because he's very clear in his answer. So I don't think you need to worry about being confused. But he addresses his work directly to Francis Bacon. He says, "Dear Sir Francis Bacon," he is really not happy with Bacon's interpretation of how we go finding truth and gaining knowledge. And so he really wants to talk to the philosophers of the time about that. And so that, like I said, along with George Campbell, I believe those are the only ones I put on there, will help get you through this exam. This does not mean you shouldn't go look at those other lectures. This is like the cartoon version or the um, handbook for dummies version, or the Cliff's Notes, as we used to call them. You guys have a different word for them now, and I don't know what that is. The short version is what I'm giving you here, and it's very, very imprecise in the sense that it doesn't go into details. So make sure that you check out those other ones. Good luck on your exam. I'll be recording another video this week about your paper, paper 2, just so you have really good direction on that. And I will see you all on the flip side. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, or threats, please text me if you can. Emails, I do get to more often. I'm doing better about that, and my computer's doing better about that, but I still wouldn't rely on it. Just saying. You have until this coming Sunday. So today's Monday. You have until Sunday to get this exam done. So do it. All right, all. Have a good week.